Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because, we get to explore something that I think is really beyond what would be referred to as in vogue or hot topic. And it really has the potential of changing the life of yourself as well as every single person that touches you and your organization. When Bob Quinn was 19 years old, he had a life-changing experience. He decided to leave college in his sophomore year to serve a 2-year mission. The mission taught him discipline, resilience, and how to work with all kinds of people. Perhaps most importantly, it taught him how to make a difference in people's lives and how purpose can give our life more meaning. Returning to college as a 21-year-old sophomore, he became depressed. American history and Stats 101 felt less important than the work he was doing on his mission. He knew he needed to be in school, so he assessed how he might find meaning in his current life situation. He thought about what he had given in his mission, or what he has received in his mission, such as meaning, and realized that he had a front row seat to change. From that point forward, he mapped out his college path and major. He chose his classes based on who was teaching instead of what the course was. He focused on courses that would educate him on change. Eventually, this path led him to a newly created field called organizational behavior. Since that time, his interest in transformation has never waned. He has spent the last 45 years researching, teaching, and practicing deep change. He is one of the top 1% of professors cited in organizational behavior textbooks and is an expert on the subjects of leadership, purpose, and cultural change. He has published 18 books, including his most current book, The Economics of Higher Purpose, and his bestseller, Deep Change. Bob was also at the forefront of the positive organizations movement and is one of the co-founders of the Ross Center for Positive Organizations. He spent 30 years at the University of Michigan Ross School of Business and is currently the Margaret Elliott Tracy Collegiate Professor Emeritus. A global survey recently named him one of the top speakers in the world on the topic of organizational culture and related issues. He has touched many, many lives in his effort to teach people how to become the best version of themselves, and he continues to try to do this for his wife of 50 years. Delsa, his 6 children, 5 in-laws, and 17 grandchildren. Unfortunately, they pose his greatest challenge, and they are sure he is grateful for the chance to test his limits and skill. The saying that it's hard to be a prophet in your own country has become very meaningful to him. Dr. Quinn, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
I'm glad to be with you today.
I'm glad you're here. Now, I've given my legion a little bit about you, but can you share what your current passion is so that we can get to know you even better?
Well, I've tried to reduce my life to 3 words: inspire, positive, change. That's my life mission. So I can talk to you for 2 hours about the word inspire, or 2 hours about the word positive, or 2 hours about the word change. And anytime I utter those 3 words, I transform. If I'm in a boring meeting and I remember those 3 words, I immediately change my behavior. I do something to elevate that meeting. And I don't sabotage the meeting or take it over, but I take a different approach to what's happening in that moment. And so I'm passionate about that notion of inspiring positive change.
Well, as you're saying that, I start thinking about what I was reading in the book, and your co-author, Anjan Thacker. I think it's really important to talk about the conventional mindset, because even what you were talking about as far as that redirection, that's not conventional. But when you start talking about conventional mindset and you start talking about the work that you did in this book, I think it's important to kind of lay the groundwork in the 2 different viewpoints and perspectives that came forward in this book.
Sure. If you look at economics, the first 3 assumptions are man or woman is a rational, self-interested actor. Resources are scarce. conflict is inevitable. We organize in hierarchies. Information is filtered. The list goes on and on and on. And economics is called the gloomy science because those are pretty gloomy assumptions. So, where do social scientists get this garbage, right? They study me and they study you. And much of the time, I behave as a self-interested, rational actor. And most of the time, my resources are scarce. Most of the time, conflict is lingering. And I can't trust the other person. I've got to figure out what's his agenda. What's he trying to get from me, right? It's a transactional relationship. In all of that, learning is deeply dampened, and growth is dampened. But those assumptions, and most of us say, oh, they're gloomy assumptions. I'm glad I don't believe that. Every one of us is governed by those assumptions. Right below the chin, right here. They're unconsciously operating all the time. I'm saying, what does my boss want? What do I tell these direct reports? I'm living by transactional theory all day long, and transactional theory creates the culture of the organization. Now, the contrast, if you think about that think of a normal curve and put those in the middle, then over on the left, where the normal curve turns to what's less desirable, what we have is the realization of those assumptions: conflict, constant problems, trying to manage the problems, increasing control, fighting resistance. It's what every manager does all day long. Now that leaves one blank space in that normal curve. And the question is, what's on the other side of that curve? That's what we never think about. And the answer is, sometimes people are not self-interested. When is that? What does it tell us? Sometimes we create resources in real time. How do we do that? Sometimes we live in trust and we don't filter the information. Sometimes learning accelerates. Sometimes we become incredibly collaborative and creative, and we do things that other organizations can't do. In other words, high performance, the stuff at the right side of the curve, is not based on conventional assumptions. And most people become petrified by that, right? They say, well, then you're a utopian. Well, we're not talking about utopia. We're talking about reality. 20 years ago, we founded a new field of study called positive organization scholarship. And it asked, what do people look like at their best? What do groups look like at their best? And what do organizations look like at their best? And the mission was, how do you scientifically answer those three questions? So you're not talking philosophy or religion or values. You're talking scientific fact about man, woman, groups, and organizations at their best. And we now know a lot about that, but it doesn't look conventional.
Well, and as you're talking about the conventional mindset, I mean, to me, as you were talking, I started hearing a lot about fear motivators and fear influencers. And I mean, even when you start talking about the thing that's so embedded in our corporate culture, it's SWOT, it's weaknesses, threats. It's when you look at the statistics associated with the conversations that happen at the board level, 85% to 90% of it is all about, risk mitigation, and it's all of the fear, components and elements. But here's the thing that I found interesting as I was doing research on this. And if you go to businesspurpose.com, and look at some of the statistics, it says, globally, when you start looking at our society, most people, 67% agree that it's become more important that brands choose to make positive contribution to society. And so we're making our purchase dollars now and decisions based on that. Also, when you start looking at purpose-led brands, they've seen their value surge by 175% over the past 12 years versus a growth rate of just 70%, for the listless brands in here. And then also global leadership forecasts that, it actually impacts, finances of organizations by 42% when they're purpose-driven. I mean, so the whole economics of this is also defying what the conventional thinking is.
That's absolutely right. We have more and more research showing that purpose-driven organizations do better, not only on human factors, but on financial and related factors. But for someone who's thinking conventionally, someone who's been trained in graduate school in any field, that is a huge leap of faith, right? Because everything I know says it can't be true. It's all about compromise, transaction, efficiency, being smarter than any other person, being in a game and beating them in the game. We're so meshed in that I can take that researcher citing and put it in front of people, and it doesn't change anything. That is, facts are irrelevant when they're not aligned with your current belief system. And that's why this stuff is an enormous opportunity for CEOs and senior executives who want an advantage, right? But it's not about money. That's the paradox, right? The money is a natural consequence of pursuing the purpose. That violates Milton Friedman, and we're very sure that can't be true.
Well, and you've essentially put together this concept and topic, call it, as something called intellectual arrogance. If you can explain that a little bit.
That sounds like it's a university thing, intellectual arrogance. Intellectual arrogance is something that I engage in every minute, you do, and everybody on the street does. If you go to biology and research in biology and look at the autonomic nervous system, whenever there's a disruption of any kind, if I'm in a meeting and the CEO raises his eyebrow, it's a very simple act. My autonomic nervous system reacts to that. My first, what I call level 2, is I go into fight or flight mode. I tense up, and then you mentioned fear a while ago. That's fear-based. Well, many, many times a day, we're in that place. If we're in this interview and you ask me some question I've never thought about before, I'm going to tend to have a natural reaction to go into fight or flight. That is, and when I do, cortisol begins to pump in my brain. My system tenses up. I underperform my potential. On the other hand, I can go from there to level 3, in which I feel safe and I feel connected to you. And together, we can hold a conversation where we are co-creating learning in real time. You're asking me meaningful questions. I give you meaningful answers, leading you to share something meaningful. We're building on each other. And we finish the hour saying, that was one of the best hours I've spent in a year, right? That's a very different experience. But even our biology works against us in terms of going there.
So when I think about this, I start talking. You start talking about this conflict, and I think you've set this up: conflict of value creation and higher purpose, and all those elements, and all of those fear motivators, and all that conventional wisdom, and all that arrogance is really positioned within these two areas. So if you can talk a little bit about this conflict, and then also what has happened in the past 5 years with that conflict.
To be in any human system and to be surrounded by change, which we always are, but in the last decade or so, we're experiencing change at a higher rate than any human experienced before. I cannot pick up my phone and look at the headlines without seeing such and such company introduced a new technology today, right? We're being overwhelmed by technological advances, and every one of those has consequences. So we live in enormous uncertainty. Our governments are failing us. We do a lot of personality pointing, but we have these huge hierarchies across the world we call governments. They can't adapt. Corporations are dying at a faster rate than any time in history. They have an enormous challenge adapting. human beings, let's just think about the pandemic. And when I have really honest conversations with the people close to me, and they describe, I think of some women talking to me about, I don't know if my kid's going to go to school in September. What do I do with that? I haven't had a conversation I haven't been out with any friends for 6 months. I'm disconnected. I'm isolated. I'm getting depressed, right? And those are people in pretty good situations. Think about all the people who are in deprived situations, right? We have a huge population of very troubled people. That conflict trickles down. Then we get angry, right? We either fight or flight. We either get depressed or we get angry. Now look at the political situation, not only in this country, but in every country. And we don't even know if we can contain it anymore. We look at the November election and say, what's going to happen that day? We're in a very fragile place. And then we have people, if you look in the United States, and I won't pick one side of the aisle, look at both sides of the aisle. They live in fear, constant conflict, and in dishonesty. What's happened in the last few years is if someone uncovers something about you, just tell a bigger lie. And the notion of false news started out sounding fairly innocent. Now I think it's devastating. And it's become a tool. So we're creating chaos, and it's everywhere.
Well, as you're sitting there and talking about that, to me, it's like the savior, North Star, and the waypoint, is to really help us to connect with and find that higher purpose. And so before we go down that a little bit, I think it's important when you start talking about all the research, all the study, all the experience, all of what you've had, exposure to and have brought forth. When you start talking about higher purpose, what is higher purpose?
Higher purpose is moving from ego goals to contribution goals and figuring out for you what that most meaningful intentional state is. So for example, for me personally, I say my purpose is to inspire positive change. It took years of work to get to those 3 words, right? But when I say those 3 words, they hold for me in every situation. We've done work with thousands of people, and I have lots of colleagues who've done the same, helping people find their individual purpose. It's always about shifting from ego goals, how do I make ends meet, how do I make money, to contribution goals. What is it I'm going to give away? What are my gifts? And how am I going to give those gifts away? How am I going to make this planet a better place? And so it's always a move up. For organizations, it's equally hard, more hard actually. What is it? Why do we exist? And how is the world better because we exist in a way that connects every employee in this company? Well, that's not your typical put it on the agenda, cross it off next week task. It's a task that many executives hate because it requires so much work and it doesn't yield to normal thinking processes. So higher purpose is a purpose. Higher means it's about contribution. It's about making the world a better place.
And this isn't the superficial, buy one of these things and donate one. That's not what we're talking about here.
That's in that checklist mentality executives have. That's what they want to come up with. I've seen hundreds of organizations engage the exercise, put the plastic mat up on the wall with the vision, the mission, and the values. And I walk into the cafeteria and I say to the clerk at the end of the lunch line, hey, that thing up on the wall, what do you think of that? And she rolls her eyes. Now, that rolling of the eyes is profoundly important. When executives do the work of purpose with the ulterior motive of manipulating the system. That's management. How do I trick them into working harder? What they do is positive damage to the organization. The workforce is now even more cynical than it was yesterday. You can't fake higher purpose. You can, but it's a devastating outcome.
So I think what you're saying is short-term and long-term. I can maybe get some short-term gains from it, but the long-term impact is devastating, like you're saying. Okay, so you actually in the book, the second half of the book is talking about the 8 steps for creating a purpose-driven organization. And like you were saying, this is hard work. Also, when I have had the opportunity to work with organizations to try to do, or the discovery of that higher purpose, and you talking about the emotions that come out and the anger that pops out. I mean, you have to be prepared for that. It's not easy. So you talk about these 8 steps, and they are, and I'll read these real quick. Envision a purpose-driven organization. Discover the purpose. Meet the need for authenticity. Turn the higher purpose into a constant arbiter. Stimulate learning. Turn mid-level managers into purpose-driven leaders. Connect the people to the purpose. And then unleash the positive energizers. And so for me, when I look at this list, I'm like, okay, is going through this path or these steps, and of course they're all important, they're all interrelated, but is there a particular step? It's like when they hit this part, it's like things just kind of blossom.
Let me give 2 answers to that. The first statement is each of those 8 statements are incredibly carefully crafted because they're counterintuitive. The first one sounds innocent. Envision the purpose-driven organization or the purpose-driven workforce. Okay, that sounds easy. It's not easy. My conventional thinking says they won't cooperate unless I force them to or pay them to. Well, that's not the purpose-driven workforce. Now, almost every policy decision we make, almost every design decision we make, I'm making the assumption I got bad people who won't cooperate. And it's so implicit an assumption, right? Well, that's true for every one of those 8 statements. Now, they do have a sequence to them, and your question is, is there a turning point? The research has a pretty clear answer to that. If you get to the point where you're already all the way down to the middle managers, and they've bought in authentically, and they now are purpose-driven leaders, then we begin to see a financial return. Now, if you go further, and very few companies do this is hard work, and you get it all the way to the first line, the outcomes are extraordinary, right? But there's like 4 or 5 steps just to get to the that one step on the middle managers. And Anjan and I both say often the most important word in that book is the word authentic. The average executive cannot imagine authenticity. To have an authentic purpose, one that's real. Well, how do you know it's real? It's the arbiter of every decision. Well, what does that even mean? We were in a company in Ohio, and this mid-level woman told us in the middle of this meeting, told a story. She said, this morning I was with my boss, and he said, we're going to do X. And I said, no, we're not. Now, when she said that, every head in the room looked at her. She said, we're not going to do that because our purpose as a company is this, and that's inconsistent. And the boss said, oh, yes, thank you. Now, at that moment, the CEO who was sitting next to me said, do you see what I mean? When purpose is the arbiter of every decision, that means every person in the organization becomes empowered. Now, we can't imagine that. We can't imagine coming up with a statement which would be the arbiter of every decision, to be constant in it. Because we live in a world of convenience and compromise. Ethics, again, go back, look at the political stage with both sets of actors. The dominant principle is do what's convenient. Lie, cheat, steal, do whatever if it's convenient. There is no moral principle there, right? And constancy of purpose means I have to do things harder. We're working with a company right now, and we've made enormous progress. And then last week, one of the people said, I had to fire somebody. You know, if we're pursuing our purpose, we still have to do hard things sometimes, and sometimes you fire people. And I said, that's exactly right. Tell me how you fired them differently than ever before. You see, if I'm living that higher purpose, I don't do anything the way I used to do it. It's much harder work because I'm building a culture in which people are integrated and spontaneous and contributing. Conventional economic theory will not take me there.
So as you're talking, I also start thinking about the focus on customer experience over the past couple of years and how more and more organizations are talking about that whole retention piece instead of the acquisition piece, and, you know, helping, you know, to people, you know, helping people to become more successful. Talking about, you know, the whole cloud-based technology systems where stickiness is important and client success is important. And when I start thinking about purpose, now it's easy for me to say, oh, I can see the economics now, the relationship is the key. And then therefore, you know, I start putting these things in place, but then that whole authenticity starts rearing its head. So how do we make sure that we are becoming more customer-centric, more customer-focused, because that is a very and vital purpose these days, without sacrificing the authenticity.
You know, for a lot of companies, they end up focusing as they do purpose work on their customer. And that's crucial because that makes life inconvenient, right? I have to work harder if I'm sincere about the customer. But that's only a partial view. What about the suppliers? What about the employees? What about, you know, am I capable of even getting to a higher level? But when you get there, it's a different transaction. It's not transactional anymore. So think about the customer-centered companies early on. I remember 30 years ago buying my first non-American car. This was at the height of the quality wars. And the U.S. was just terrible. So I went and bought a Honda Accord. And I remember for 3 years, every time I got in that Honda Accord and sat in the driver's seat, I said, I made a really good decision. And I couldn't even explain it. Just sitting in that seat, that product had quality that other products didn't have, right? Now, those things change over time, etc. But at that moment, Honda, Toyota, they were doing something that Ford and General Motors wasn't doing at the time, right? And they were focused on me as a customer. Now, if you do that, your work as a leader is much more challenging, right, than the kind of leadership we were getting from American managers at the time. Now, we've made a lot of progress since, but the point is, it's not business as business. It's not a game. It's not a transaction, although that never goes away. I have to save money. I have to be efficient. But it's bigger than that, right? And Milton Friedman is just wrong.
Had somebody else trying to get in. Who's the next guest? Sorry. Well, but as you're, you know, I mean, for me, as you're saying that, I start thinking about, you know, the hold on one second. That disrupted me. Let me think. But as you know, as we're talking about that and where we are today, needless to say, it is very important for us to build this purpose-driven society, because the natural forces of, you know, all of, like you said, the global governments, you know, I mean, we could just go on and on and on. Like you said, talk for 2 hours. We could probably go for 12. I may be even in an organization where I don't have some of those things occurring. Can a mid-level manager be somebody who is actually causing the change to happen from within at that lower level?
For 20 years, since we started Positive Organization Scholarship, and we began to teach these kinds of notions, the single most frequent question I'm ever asked is some version of what you just asked. I'm just a accountant. I'm just a middle manager. I'm just I'm just a member of the C-suite, but I'm not the CEO. The list goes on. This is a financial organization. Oh, this is a medical, just fill in the blank, right? If you took all those questions and lined them up, they would guarantee, what they do is they paint a very clear picture. People know, absolutely know, that in their organization, they have no voice. And we love to put pictures on that of, we're talking about first level people. We're talking about everybody. We're talking about CEOs who feel disempowered, who can't make things happen. And I can't emphasize that enough, CEOs. We have learned helplessness everywhere, and the culture reinforces it. Warren Bennis wrote a book called The Unconscious Conspiracy, and his point is just so precious. He was the president of the University of Cincinnati, and as he reflected on that in the book, he said there was a conspiracy, unconscious, but every moment someone would come in and say, President, you need to sign these 100 letters for the alumni asking for money. President, you need to meet with someone. Here's all your meetings for the day. He said, my entire life was structured by bureaucrats meeting conventional needs. That's what management is. Now, what that also meant is I could not change the institution. There was virtually zero time for me to lead. Bureaucracies, hierarchies, conspire to smother leadership, and they do. I had a dean of a medical school told me, the first thing I did when I became dean is I hired a psychologist to coach me every Friday. And his coaching was prescribed. It was one question. He had asked me the same question every Friday. What have you done this week to move the institution? Yeah, you wrote 100 letters. Yeah, you solved 50 problems. How is the culture better today than it was last week? How is this a better organization? He said, I bring him in. I have him ask me that because that's what leadership is. It's not solving the problems, delivering the financial bottom line. It's making a better institution than I had last week. And if I do, those other issues take care of themselves. That's very hard for people to believe. But the point is, biologically, our biology conspires to stop us. Our culture conspires to stop us. We know we're powerless. And until we make the changes, until we know our own personal purpose and are committed to it, we are just reactive. We're armies of the walking dead. That's what most organizations look like.
So in order for us to not be that guy or gal, it does require a lot of inspiration, a lot of insight, and you've shared a ton, and I greatly appreciate that. But one of the things that we look on the show for that inspiration are quotes. Is there a quote or two that you like that you can share?
Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. That's a profound quote. Most people quote it but don't know what it means. In the leadership industry, the fundamental belief is that leadership is about knowledge and skills. And that's totally misleading. Leadership is about your state of being. In terms of, again, answering your last question, I wrote a book with my son called Lift, The Fundamental State of Leadership. And we said, here's 4 questions you can ask yourself in any situation. If you answer them authentically, you will empower yourself and you will lead. And the 4 questions are, what result do I want to create? People say, oh, that's a throwaway. I always do that. No, you don't. The question you ask yourself all the time is, how do I get what I want? What result do I want to create means I have to do something that's not been done. I have to create. Am I internally directed? Am I authentic in the embrace of this result or intention? Am I other-focused? That is, do I practice empathy for all the other people in the equation, the customers, the suppliers, my employees? Do I know their deepest needs and interests? It's amazing how many people can't answer that question. Fourth question is, am I externally open? Am I able to join with you and listen to you and co-create the next step in this journey with you as an equal? Now, I still have 4 stars on my shoulder, and I can stop and say, no, we're not going to do that. But can I step out of that? Can I step out of my authority and expertise? If you can answer those 4 questions in any situation, no matter how big a knot you have in your stomach, you change your biology. You go from level 2 to level 3. You begin to function. Oxytocin pumps in the brain. You instantaneously see strategies you couldn't see 5 minutes ago. You can do that. Everybody can do that. Everybody knows they can't. So we're talking about something incredibly basic. And that's what Gandhi was saying. Be the change you want to see in the world. You turn into positive change and invite others to join you.
So as you're talking about that, I start thinking about times when I didn't ask those 4 questions, when I didn't do the right thing, when I had learning opportunities from it. And on the show, we talk about getting over the hump. So we've had learning opportunities, and others can learn from that and hopefully not have the same failure points. Is there a time where you've gotten over the hump that you can share?
Well, I'll take you back to the 6th grade. In the 6th grade, we had really cute cheerleaders. And on the first day of school, the teacher walked in, pointed to a kid and said, you have to go to the other school. Your parents had moved across the boundaries this summer. Now, it turns out this boy was the cutest boy in the class, the most athletic boy in the class, and the most popular. Every cheerleader loved this boy. Now, as he marched out of the room, I thought, this is my opportunity. If he was the best basketball player, then I'll be the best basketball player, and these cheerleaders will love me. So I went home that day at 3:30, took a lopsided basketball, went to a lopsided rim, and I shot until it was too dark to see. And I went back the next day, and the next day, and the next day. When the basketball season started, I went from being second string to being star of the team. And it was exhilarating. But the cheerleaders didn't give a hoot. They didn't even notice I was alive. It didn't work. But something else happened. For the first time in my life, I realized I could set a goal and pursue it and turn into somebody new. And then I learned, because I was a point guard, because I thought it was about ego and making lots of points and getting the cheerleaders to cheer for me. And a point guard's job was quite different. It was to make everybody on that floor better than they are. And I fell in love with that role. And all of a sudden, in the 6th grade, I'm thinking about the whole. I'm looking to make other people better. That was 1,000,000 miles away from where I started that school year. And in the end, my goal to be popular with cheerleaders never materialized. But that was a profoundly important over-the-hump moment in my life.
Oh, thanks for sharing and going that far back and talking about where you are now. I start thinking about all the work, like I said, all the work that you've amassed, but there's still a lot of work for you to do and a lot of impact. And I think you and I had the opportunity to chat a little bit before we started recording. And I think all this work that you've done right now, it is just so important and so appropriate and can be so leveraged right here, right now, more than it ever has before. And so when I start thinking about some of the goals that you have, I mean, you set, and stated what your purpose was, but if you have one goal, could you share it with us?
Yeah, I'm 74 years old. And I think until they put me in the ground, those 3 words, inspire positive change, will lead me to keep learning every day. And every day I'm going to try to turn that learning into a blog or a paper or a book that someone can read now or 100 years from now and make their life better. Now, that's the goal. In fact, I often say I have one manuscript I'm trying to write that's for my great-great-great-granddaughter. That's the objective, that she would read that manuscript and in a very dark day, she'd know what to do.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. Now, before we move on, let's get a quick word from our sponsor. An Even Better Place to Work is an easy-to-use solution that gives you a continuous diagnostic on employee engagement along with integrated activities that will improve employee engagement and leadership skills in everyone. Using this award-winning solution is guaranteed to create motivated, productive, and loyal employees who have great work relationships with their colleagues and your customers. To learn more about An Even Better Place to Work, visit beyondmorale.com/better. Award-winning solution is guaranteed to create motivated, productive, and loyal employees who have great work relationships with their colleagues and your customers. To learn more about An Even Better Place to Work, visit beyondmorale.com/better. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Bob, the Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions.
Okay.
Give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Dr. Quinn, are you ready to hoe down?
I'm ready.
All right. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
My ego.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
I think that Gandhi quote, be the change you want to see in the world.
What is one of your secrets that you believe contributes to your success?
I think those 4 questions help me and anybody else. What result do I want to create? Am I internally directed? Am I other focused? Am I externally open?
And what is one of the best tools that you believe helps you in business or life?
At the beginning, we talked about the conventional assumptions, and then we talked about assumptions on the right side of the curve. I call those social excellence assumptions. That's the most powerful tool I know. When I lay that in front of a set of executives and they look at that, a whole new world opens, right? It's about envisioning what's possible as opposed to being determined by what we know.
Okay, and what would be one book that you'd recommend to our Legion? And it can be from any genre. Of course, we're going to put a link to The Economics of Higher Purpose and Deep Change in your show notes page as well.
There's an old book called The Path of Least Resistance by Robert Fritz. I think that's one of the most valuable books I ever read.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net/Bob Quinn. Okay, Dr. Quinn, this is my last update hold on question. Imagine you've been given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25 and you can take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you. However, you can't take it all. You can only take just one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you and why?
I would say the skill would be learning by faith. Now, what does that mean? There's 2 words, knowing and learning. The danger is when I know, I stop learning. And the learning is not book learning. It's the ability for you and I to step into uncertainty and make a better world. So that's the skill I take back.
Dr. Quinn, I've had fun with you today. How can the Fast Leader Legion connect with you?
There's a website, Robert E. Quinn, and there's a lot of stuff on that they might find interesting.
Robert E. Quinn, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and the Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.